Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. This is our training camp preview as, well, we're recording on a Tuesday night. It's just episode 231. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com. On the line with me is my co-host, as always, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site for SB Nation. And we're recording Tuesday nights. The Cardinals report on Wednesday. So by the time the episode hits, before it drops and you guys could listen to it, I believe the team will already have had its conditioning test, and training camp will officially be underway, although the first practices happen on Thursday. Seth, what is new, and how much training camp are you and your guys on the site going to be out there kind of taking a look at things?
We'll be there Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Or is it open Friday? Maybe it's just Thursday, Saturday, and then and Monday of next week. So we'll be out there kind of to the start of what they offer, and then we'll kind of piece it together from there. It's mostly then work days, right? I mean,
yeah, yep.
Unless
those of us who do things other than this all the time, we've got to pay our bills the other way too.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll be out there for day one, and then continue kind of from there. And so
I personally will be out there for 3 weekends. So we've got there are practices all the way through Sunday this week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'll be there Saturday, Sunday. Then next week on Saturday for the red and white practice. And then after their first preseason game on the 8th, I will be there for Saturday, Sunday after that. Not that there isn't going to be plenty of camp coverage all over the place. The team does a good job as well. I'm sure they will stream Cliff Kingsbury's press conferences in the morning, and the ones it's kind of interesting this year because I'm still kind of used to what Bruce Arians did, which was very set. It was always a morning walkthrough and an afternoon practice. And at least what the initial schedule for this week is they do have, it's like they do a walkthrough every other day. They'll do a walkthrough and a practice, and then the next day they'll do an earlier practice. And then there won't be a walkthrough that media is there for. Now, the walkthroughs media can't report on. They're technically closed. We do get a little bit of insight as to what we might see during practice. And so sometimes you'll hear some insights from a guy like Mike Jurecki here and that. So keep an eye on so-and-so in practice today. And that's because there was a little bit of insight. But I wonder if it's kind of interesting if that means if they're not doing walkthroughs on some days, that their practice is going to be more walkthrough like, or kind of split up so it's lightened up. I don't know. Steve Wilkes kind of ran them like that. I think there's going to be a couple of outside practices, not quite as many as what Wilkes had. But we already know that there are more open practices than a year ago. There were 14 open practices this year. Thursday and Friday, if you were out there at State Farm Stadium, they will be not in pads. You can't put on pads until the third practice. And so if you want to hear the hitting and hear the volume going up, that will happen on Saturday. They'll have Saturday, Sunday, and then they'll have their first day off on Monday before they get back at it again. Now, in tonight's show and today's show, this week's show, we're going to talk about, this is our training camp preview, so we're going to talk about all things of camp. We have the news about the PUP list, the physically unable to perform list. We've got 6 players that are nursing injuries of some sort. We'll talk about that. What are the biggest questions and stories for camp? The position battles we want to watch. Notable players on the roster that are on the bubble, and if if you listen, I just dropped an article on Cards Wire Tuesday night where I named there are 6 Cardinals that are firmly on the roster bubble at the start of camp. Each of us is going to talk about, we'll each talk about the players in particular we're going to pay attention to in camp. And lastly, who could be some of the surprises as camp and preseason continue. So let's go ahead and get started. Seth, news on the PUP. There are 6 players on that list. The first 2 were no surprise at all. There's Robert Kimdichie and Max Garcia, both of whom are recovering from torn ACLs. Kimdichie's was late in the season. I think Garcia played exactly half the season. But then there were 4 other names on the list that that's the thing about the offseason. They don't disclose injuries unless they want to. So that included undrafted rookie linebacker Dante Booker, cornerback Brandon Williams, veteran outside linebacker Brooks Reed, and tight end Charles Clay. With the news, what surprised you when you saw this list come out over the weekend? Of course, on a Saturday afternoon when I was at the grocery store was when they released the information and they announced, hey, Will Holden is cut again. We'll see if he gets signed back at some point. But what was your reaction to seeing who was on that list and who was not on that list?
Like you said, Kimdichie, Garcia, not unexpected. If you follow Booker out of college, not unexpected. In fact, him playing will be kind of impressive because he's had injury issues his entire time at Ohio State. We talked about that in our undrafted free agency review time. So the Brooks Reed, that's the one that I guess he's had a groin issue. It's like you said, it's not disclosed, but I guess he's had like a groin or some lower body issue that has caused him to kind of have to start out a little slow. They listed it as a hip, so I guess hip, groin, it's all attached right there, right? And then Clay. So I talked to a guy in Buffalo that basically said part of the thing with Clay is that there's a chance that he's doesn't practice a whole lot. That he's just not that he's injured by any means, but that knee is kind of oldish and older than him. So it could cause, not that he'd miss games or anything like that. Just it's one of those take an extra day or 2 off every week type thing, kind of like they did with Palmer's shoulder elbow thing from a couple years ago. Similar type thing. So I guess when you dig into it, maybe it's not surprising, right?
Well, and the truth is I know with some of these players it's simply precautionary and they could be back out of practice the second day. The Cardinals have always played it kind of safe like that because how PUP works, if you're unaware, you can only place someone on PUP before camp begins, because once they practice, they're ineligible for it after that. And the benefit of the PUP list in the preseason is if for any reason, if it carries it and they remain on there and they never come off, so if there's any setbacks and they stay on throughout the preseason, they can, when the regular season comes, you don't have to put them on injured reserve, which you only can bring back 2 players. They begin the season on the regular season PUP, which has them out for the first 6 weeks. And then you've got a couple weeks to do that. And that's what I anticipate with Robert Kimdichie because of when he tore his ACL right at the end of the season. And this isn't because Tyrann Mathieu made it back. And even then he really didn't play like the first. When he tore his ACL in 2015, he really didn't play like the first 3 games and then was very, very limited for the next couple games after that. So I would anticipate he won't play to start the season. Garcia will have to wait and see on, but the other guys, just kind of a safeguard for anything else. That way, if they had a setback, it doesn't mean they have to carry them on the roster or put them on injured reserve, which
right, they don't have to go on IR and
stuff like that. And so, but for me, actually, there were actually 3 players who were not on the list that were, or 4. In fact, there were 4. It was the absence of 4 players that was very optimistic for me. 2 are coming off ACL injuries, and that would be AQ Shipley and DJ Foster. Now, granted, they suffered theirs in training camp at the preseason, so it's almost completely a year removed. That said, that means they're completely clear for practice. And so while they might be monitored some, they are fully healthy. That was good to see for 1. And then 2, you have 2 guys coming off foot injuries. Christian Kirk broke his foot after 12 games. He was 100% ready to go back in February, March. But as we saw with Justin Bethel a few years ago, that the foot can be troublesome. And to see that he does not start on PUP, that's good news. And the same with second-year tackle Corey Cunningham, who cracked his foot in the last couple of games, especially for big guys. That can cause problems later on. And the fact that they are ready to practice is good news to me.
Yeah, and that's important. I mean, obviously Gilbert and Humphreys are 2 guys that everybody's going to be keeping their eye on basically the entire offseason. And then once the season starts, you just want to see them out there. Like, that's the biggest thing. So, I mean, when you look at the PUP, when you look at the list of guys, it's not overly concerning. It's not surprising. It made sense now. Now it makes a little bit more sense that they brought in like a Nick Perry to work out last week, because now all of a sudden you're Brooks Reed may not be ready for like game 1 of the preseason. Okay. It's type stuff like that. And he may be ready, but like you said, the nice thing is with the PUP now, you don't have to rush him. You don't have to feel rushed to add him.
Right. And that's interesting because at outside linebacker, they do not have a ton of players. You've got.
They just don't have a ton of veteran depth.
Well, right. But they don't even have a lot of young players. I mean, granted, it's not like how it was before. But you've got 3 old guys in Chandler Jones, Terrell Suggs. And Chandler's he's not old, but he's in his 8th year in the league. So you got Chandler Jones, Terrell Suggs, and Brooks Reed. The only other guys you have on the roster at outside linebacker are Antarius Dora, Cameron Malvo, and Pita Taumoepenu, who you probably never heard of because that's a name that sounds fake. But they're young, but that means if you give Jones and Suggs, or even if you give Suggs any reps in the preseason, and Brooks Reed can't go, then you are going to run all your defensive snaps with basically 3 players at outside linebackers. So having Reed healthy, able to practice is going to be kind of important. And the fact that they haven't signed someone at that position is kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, and maybe it's just one of those situations where you have to, they're kind of waiting to see if a young guy will step up in that role, because like you said, they don't have much there. So maybe that's what they're kind of waiting to see. Like, hey, does anybody step up? If not, then we're going to go out and guys are available. Like I said, like a Nick Perry. I mean, he's out there. Nobody signed him. Nobody's going to sign him. So if push comes to shove, after preseason game 3 or heck, even preseason game 4, you can go get a guy like a Nick Perry that can come in and just be a situational pass rusher without practicing, in week 1, and that would be okay.
Okay, coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, we're going to talk about our biggest questions and stories for the team as they enter camp. That's coming next on the Best Hour of Cardinals Talk on the Web. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the Best Hour of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Biggest questions and stories relating to the team as we enter camp. I think we both would have to or likely agree that kind of 1 and 1A are circled around both Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray. What is this offense going to look like? And what is Kyler Murray going to? Because that's going to be one of the most impressive things, and I think we might see a even better attendance in training camp, at least in the weekday practices, and probably across the board, because there's this kid who is the number 1 pick, and he's exciting.
Well, the intrigue is there, and I would say more than. I think the intrigue is higher. The anticipation may not be as high, but I think the intrigue is higher than even like that 2016 offseason where they were being picked to be the, to win the Super Bowl or go to the Super Bowl by certain teams.
Oh, totally. Because 2016, everyone was excited about the season. Everyone was just crossing their fingers about the preseason. Please make it there. But and I think BA did too. But this year, the preseason is exciting and intriguing. In 2016, that part wasn't intriguing. It was getting to the season intact. This is different.
Yeah, this is intrigue. Is this, what is this going to look like? Who is this team? All of those kind of unknowns. There's much, like you said, there's much more unknown to this than there was anything in 16 or anything like that. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's, it's going to create this anticipation that we haven't had that in the desert, maybe since the Leinart training camps. And that was still up at Flagstaff, so that was before you and I even. We were just pups covering the team.
I remember attending as a fan one practice in Flagstaff with Matt Leinart, Derek Anderson. I was there for Kevin Cobb's first camp, and then I was there for Cobb versus Skelton in 2012. Those were legitimate, intriguing preseasons because of the battle at quarterback. This year, there's no battle at quarterback, even though Brett Hundley would like you to think so. But it's all because of Kyler Murray and this offense, because the way they talk about the offense, it's, pace and Chip Kelly and 90 and 95 plays and shotgun. And are they really going to practice that fast? Are they, because you have to practice the way you're going to play, right? So we're going to actually see, is it going to be a gimmick offense? Is it going to look like a college offense, or is it going to look more pro than we expect?
Yeah, and that's the question that we all have is and more than that, what are they going to show? What are we going to see in training camp, and how is it going to translate to the start of the season? I think that's a big one too. So one of the things that you look at, kind of the questions you have, is what offense are we even going to see? We're going to see a lot of 3 and 4 wide receiver sets, but are we going to see the offense that's going to start game one, or is this just going to be a lot of repetition in the kind of K-Raid, Air Raid, basic type stuff, and that's what they'll show in these open type practices? And if that's the case, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's going to be, a lot of similar looks every single time that the fans are there, and so it won't necessarily tell us much about the entire situation, but it will give us an interesting look at what parts of the offense and what they're drilling home to the wide receivers, and kind of where guys are lining up and things of that nature.
What is your next kind of biggest question or story related to the team as they enter camp?
I think you can break it down into subtext and things of that nature for me. So the first one is obviously about the offense, but I think the second one's going to be, what does the offensive line look like? Obviously, health is the biggest thing, but do they look cohesive? One of the things that you and I were text ad nauseum last year was about how bad certain aspects of the line looked, and that in turn begged the question between you and I, well, is Robert Kimdiche? I mean, pulling back the veil a little bit, Jess and I got text about how dominant Robert Kimdiche was during camp. And Jess and I would go back and forth on, oh, this is good. And then we'd be like, or is it good? Is this good? I mean, and so that's the question is like, are we seeing Darius Fallon and Rodney Gunter and Corey Peters kind of eat up the offensive line? Because not saying those guys aren't going to be good, but that's not, I mean, if you rank offensive or defensive lines in the NFL, you're not going to see that trio in the top probably 20. And so again, we don't necessarily want to see that. We want to see, cohesiveness, competence, guys looking like they're going to be able to play at a high level. So that would be my next thing for the offense, at least.
For me, what obviously something else I want to see is the play at receiver. Oh, more than anything, what do we see from the rookies? They have put a lot of stock into rookies, and there's several that should make contributions. How do they look? Well, rookies often look a little lost. Kyler Murray, number one, Byron Murphy, Zach Allen, Andy Isabella, Hakeem Butler, they should all have some sort of a role this year. So we should see flashes in camp. Do they live up till the billing with the expectations? Other guys, I mean, Michael Dogby and Keyshawn Johnson could end up being rotational guys, but being drafted late on day 3, you don't have the same expectations. But the Cardinals seem to be counting on those other guys, well, obviously Murray and Murphy, but even Zach Allen to be have some sort of impact, in Isabella and Butler, all of them. And so in camp, do we see them making plays from time to time, or are they kind of invisible? Because we've seen that from players before where we're hoping for a lot and then you don't see a lot, or whether they get buried in the depth chart and they're down with the third stringers.
Well, and I think you hit an important point, is that the expectations on this rookie class are absurd. This isn't even like 2013 level expectations where you're just excited that they drafted Jonathan Cooper, or what does Tyrann Mathieu have? Is he going to be the Honey Badger? This is picks that will define the franchise's direction over the next 3 years, because obviously Kyler Murray isn't, I mean, if he flops, then this team is awful. However, if they get obviously the continued growth of Christian Kirk, what everybody expects, but then they get Andy Isabella to step up and be a true, third wide receiver in his rookie season. I mean, if Isabella puts up Kirk type numbers and then Kirk and Fitz are right around 1,000 yards, man, all of a sudden you're like, okay, this is a really good class. And then Byron Murphy, if he takes over that, that second corner spot to start the, wins the cornerback 2 spot to start the season while Patrick Peterson's out, and then all of a sudden Peterson comes back and you're like, oh wow, they got 3 solid, So like you said, the rookie class is so important, but the wide receivers in this class will really define kind of the next couple of years, because if they exceed expectations slightly, most people are assuming they're going to pick in the top 5 to 10 in the draft, and you have a guy coming out of Colorado whose name I can't pronounce, and then you've got Jerry Jeudy out of Alabama, and so you've got 2 guys that are consistently considered like elite Laviska Chenault is the guy out of Colorado. I can't pronounce his name, but you've got these two guys that are looked at as surefire first round picks, and so if the Cardinals are picking in the top 10 again, man, it's going to be really. That's not what you want to see, right? That they took two guys in the second round in 2 consecutive years, and then they have to go get a first round wide receiver as well. Obviously, if the rest of the team, if the offensive line improves so much in the defensive line, and now all of a sudden you're just talking about, picking a wide receiver in the 20s, okay, maybe that's a little different. But if we're talking a top 10 pick, that's not exactly where we want to see them go. So, that's the thing. You're right. These wide receivers, how do they play out? How does it shake out? Does Chad Williams even make the roster? Is Hakeem Butler anything more than kind of like a red zone target in his first year? All of those are really interesting conversations and will make, kind of camp really interesting and enjoyable to watch.
This is not so much a story as a question, and it's one of the things I wrote when I put together last week, kind of the 7 questions entering training camp for the Cardinals, and this is kind of a question that I've had, and that's, well, will we be able to count on Zane Gonzalez, because they've made it quite clear all offseason he's their kicker. Now, you can always find another kicker late in the game, someone gets cut, but there's usually a reason for that. And considering the kickers in the division, are we that sold? Are we that sold on Zane Gonzalez? Will he be enough at a position that's going to be, let's be honest, you don't want to spend a lot of money on a kicker to be good, but then when the kicker's not good, it really sort of ruins things.
Well, and not only that, but you look at last year, there's 2 games you can directly say that Phil Dawson makes kicks. Okay, they're a 5-win team. I mean, if nothing else changes, if we just don't talk about momentum and all the other things, if Phil Dawson makes 2 kicks, they're a 5-win team. Okay, you go back the year or the 2016 year, if Chandler Catanzaro makes that kick against the Patriots, are we talking about a completely different team? Oh, we got off to a rocky start and then we just blew out the Bucs in game 2. Okay, now we're back to where we want to be. Right? And so you may not think much of it when you get down to the brass tacks of things of like, oh, well, this is a 4-win team, or, oh, this is a 5-win team. And okay, so maybe they're a 6-win team with a better kicker. But at the same time, do you really every offseason want to go, okay, we got to go find a kicker now? Like, at some point, you'd like to feel like they've got that position solidified. Because, I mean, one of the things that we've seen from the Cardinals is that, especially with young players, if you're putting them in a position where it comes down to a kick, if all of a sudden those kicks are missed consistently, or even the team doesn't necessarily believe in the kicker, now all of a sudden they put more pressure on themselves, right? Now all of a sudden they feel like they have to, we can't just settle for a field goal. We got to go get a touchdown. So, Zane Gonzalez was an insanely good kicker. You and I talked about this when he was drafted. I think his name's Gordon McGinnis of Pro Football Focus, like, raved about Zane Gonzalez coming out. Said crazy things like he was the best kicker he's ever scouted, blah, 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 like that. So, I mean, the talent has always been there for Zane, but all of a sudden, like Chuck Knobloch when he played for the Yankees, sometimes they just get that mental block, right, where they can't perform something that they've been doing basically their whole life. And so, if Zane isn't able to consistently, hit those kicks, now all of a sudden you're very concerned about your rookie quarterback and his psyche moving forward.
Yeah, well, and the thing about the position, I feel much more comfortable you and I are both being ASU guys, we're big fans. I love Zane Gonzalez. I want to see him succeed. Here's the thing. You for a guy that's never really been tested, like he's always either been the favorite or he's been cut. You want to see him because he hasn't really proven himself in the pros yet. He was solid down the stretch for the Cardinals. He did well, but was he good enough to not bring in anyone to compete with him other than a guy that is 2 years removed from college and never played anymore and wasn't even that good in college? And then they cut him. You go back to Chandler Catanzaro. He beat out Jay Feely that first year. It was clear he beat him out, and so you felt comfortable with him. He won a job.
And you go back to that Catanzaro, and I kind of went over it in an article I wrote when talking about Zane Gonzalez. And I know we're spending a lot of time on the kicker, which is crazy for a 3-win team. But you go back to the Catanzaro, and like he was lights out his first 2 years, like he was nails, and so. That's the question is, he was nails and Zane Gonzalez has not been. And so that's the slight difference is that you haven't seen that from Zane. And so can you just like you said, can you just trust him to win?
We'll find out. I guess we'll find out about that. Anything else in particular that are there stories coming? In my article that I wrote a week ago, I talked about, who's going to return kicks and punts, because thus far, like if you look at the favorites, I don't know if Christian Kirk's going to be punt returning again this year. And Pharaoh Cooper, the guy that they claimed off waivers, he doesn't seem like a sure thing for the team. So he's going to have to be absolutely dynamic in the return game. And they have a number of guys who can kind of do it. You just don't get a feel of who's going to do it. And then, is there going to be a time signing? We thought that they might, after they released Damon Harrison, they still got 2 open spots on the roster. So it wouldn't be a surprise to see them sign 2 guys before camp starts or at the start of camp, because why haven't they? So obviously they're waiting on something. So is that going to happen?
And where would you need those guys? That would be my biggest question. Like, do you bring in a kicker and then and then an outside backer or pass rusher type guy? Do you bring in a veteran running back? I mean, that's something that we've I've talked about is like with David Johnson, you're really okay with this running back room. Without David Johnson, you're like, oh. Like there's nobody you can trust, and so when you look at how they've built this roster, there are definitely questions that we still have, but there's also so much room for improvement. And from an expectation of a win standpoint, I think it's low enough where you're not overly concerned with maybe that time signing this year. Like, you're not looking like, oh, let's make sure we find a guy that is going to not lose us games. As much this year as you're like, I just want to see kids play at an exceptionally high level, and then, kind of continue to build in the new vision of coach, as opposed to, this is a transition year, and then we're going to be really strong up front and do this. Like, I think if you're lowering the expectations to a more realistic, 5-6 win team, you're okay with, like they don't need to bring in a veteran offensive lineman or a veteran, defensive lineman. They can just bring in, like we said, a kicker, and you're okay with that.
Coming next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, we're going to talk about the position battles to note. We've mentioned a few of them, but we'll talk about them specifically. That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, talking about the position battles. So the position battles, the roster battles at particular positions. Obviously, I think there's really 2 spots that stand out where there is a potential battle for a starting job. Number 1 is cornerback, but it's for a temporary starting job. So Who are you watching? Obviously, you've got Tremaine Brock, you've got Byron Murphy, and then maybe a little bit. Are you going to see one of those younger guys, Chris Jones, Dietrich Nichols, or heaven forbid, Brandon Williams be part of that mix? Obviously, Patrick Peterson's going to be out for the first 6 weeks, so it's going to be it's supposed to be Pete and Robert Alford, but instead for 6 weeks, it's going to be Robert Alford and somebody else. Who are the guys to watch? Obviously, for that.
I'm looking at obviously Brock and then Murphy, and I think they're going to be the top three guys along with Alfred anyway. So I don't know if you're necessarily like that's necessarily going to matter. It is interesting to see where Murphy will be, because you and I talked about the Brock thing. I kind of feel like he's going to be the Ben Wickery of this team. Like, I don't know if he's actually good, but he's a guy Joseph trusts, and that kind of matters, right? So
yeah,
and so that makes it easier for Joseph in certain instances. Brandon Williams, like, when is he going to even be ready? Because he's on that PUP list.
correct.
So he's got something going on. Do you know? I mean,
it's a back injury, but yeah, I mean, who knows if he just tweaked that. Now, and I've talked about this before. I think the perfect scenario, I think as a rookie, I think unless he far and away blows Tremaine Brock out of the water, I think it would be the smartest thing to keep him as like the primary nickelback. Just play in the slot. Obviously, let him compete, get his work outside, because you never know what can happen. But Tremaine Brock would be the perfect guy because he's a veteran. He's got starting experience. He knows Vance Joseph defense. So I think that's the perfect scenario where he starts outside and Byron Murphy sticks to the slot where he's got one role. But obviously, he's going to compete and try to start. And if he can do that, obviously, Brock would still get to play. It's just a matter of whether Murphy stays outside or if he slides inside in those nickel downs and Brock comes outside. But obviously, that's the position number one everyone's looking at. The second one, I think we feel that it's going to lean one way, but there's always the potential. So that's at starting center. Last year, Mason Cole was the guy all year because AQ Shipley tore his ACL. Shipley is back. It looks like he is the starter. His job to lose. But that's a position to watch because obviously Shipley is old and he's savvy, he's smart, he's tough, but he definitely has physical limitations. And they did draft Cole after all to be a center, right?
Well, and that was the whole thing, is that, Cole didn't play well last year, so we had talked quite a bit that they were into some of the centers, and then all the centers got drafted early, so it didn't really matter. But, when you look at it from that perspective of, they were already looking potentially at centers. They extended Shipley for a reason, obviously. I mean, because they trust him. And so whether you and I like it or not, or agree with it, I think Shipley versus Cole is a real thing that's going to kind of take place. And we'll see kind of how that comes out. I would guess that Shipley's going to win the position just based off, do you want a second-year center with a rookie quarterback? I don't know.
Well, and you look at the line, they made it, they kind of went out of their way to fill that line with veterans. So you've got DJ, who's a fifth-year guy. You've got Pugh. If you got Shipley in there, and you've got J.R. Sweezy, and you got Marcus Gilbert, you've got years and years of experience. Now, yeah, I can tell you in terms of the locker room that Shipley obviously is viewed as the starter. I think I've mentioned this on the show. I've told you this before, but the way they have the lockers set up among the offensive linemen is the starting five are together, kind of how they do everything. They sit on the bench together in that order. They kind of hang around. They're always in position. And the lockers go like this. There's DJ, there's Pugh, there's Shipley, Sweezy, and Gilbert. Then to the left of Humphreys is Max Garcia, and to the left of Garcia is Mason Cole. So obviously Shipley is viewed, as of now, within the locker room as the anchor of the line. They even have him in the locker room like that. So I think it's going to be a case where either something happens to Shipley or Cole plays out of his mind to overcome it.
Yeah. The other one is interesting, and we kind of you talked about it, but like, how do the wide receivers come out after 1 and 2? Right? Because there's no battle for 1 and 2. I mean, I guess we can say, does Christian Kirk supplant Larry Fitzgerald? But I don't think that's going to happen in camp. So the question more becomes like, who wins that third wide receiver position? Is it going to be, Andy Isabella? Is it going to be a guy like Kevin White going to come out and perform at a high level in an offense that he's familiar with or more comfortable with and succeed? Is Hakeem Butler as raw as everybody says he is, or will he be able to kind of flash? I think all those are legitimate questions. And then that doesn't even bring up Chad Williams. Like, can Chad Williams earn it?
I mean, yeah, he's kind of viewed as dead man walking, but and then another guy to watch. I won't spoil it, so I'll wait till later. There's one other. I think it's understated. I think. I don't know how serious it is, but based on what they thought of him, I think there is the potential for Zach Allen to push Rodney Gunter. I don't know how soon that'll happen, but considering they had a first-round grade on Allen, they really rave about his versatility, his athleticism, his smartness, and his smarts there. And, Gunter, I will say this, he had a great year last year. He's outside of his rookie year when he played nose tackle only, playing in a 3-4 was not great for him. And so we'll have to wait and see. I think that's going to be it's kind of a second tier roster battle. And I don't think anyone expects it, but I think Zach Allen could push Rodney Gunter in camp.
Yeah. And that shouldn't be overly surprising because Gunter was only brought back on a 1 year. I mean, it's not like they invested a lot in him. If he pushed Darius Fallon, that might be a bigger issue, right? But yeah, I think that's a good one. I mean, I think that's a good one to think about. So, I mean, the thing is, when you're a bad team, you don't necessarily have a ton of position battles. Like, bad teams and good teams don't really have position battles. It's the teams that are looking to go from bad to average or average to good where you see all the position battles. And in this case, the Cardinals, I mean, outside of tight end, which we haven't talked about, and that's mostly because we just don't even know what to expect. I mean, Charles Clay's on the PUP. Max Williams is a walking PUP. I mean, that dude is always hurt. But then Ricky Seals-Jones isn't really a real tight end. I mean, he's not bad, and so we don't even know what Cliff's offense is going to ask of tight ends. Obviously Max is more of your traditional inline blocking tight end. Clay is more of your H-back, kind of Kyle Juszczyk type of guy, and then Ricky is kind of your big slot guy. And so we don't. The thing is, we just don't even know how they're going to be used.
Right. And so tight end's kind of interesting, especially with Clay out. Is how's the pecking order going to work? Because, it's interesting. The tight end position has some interesting parallels because Darrell Daniels and Ricky Seals-Jones are both converted receivers. Daniels swapped to tight end after his freshman year at Washington, but Seals-Jones didn't until after he got to the pros, after he was done with college. Their other two guys, Caleb Wilson, they're the Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick in the draft, and Drew Belcher out of Maine. They're both former quarterbacks. Now, Belcher played a couple of years of option quarterback at Maine before they went to a pro-style offense. He went to tight end. Caleb Wilson played high school quarterback and then played tight end after that. So there's some interesting parallels. It's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. Once Clay's healthy, I think there's no question in the world who is the number one. And after that, I think it's sort of snaps here and there. I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of two tight end sets. And so it'll be crumbs and bits of snaps here and there, 10 snaps here in a game for the other guys. But that's after Clay. So obviously there's obviously a roster battle behind him because we don't know what to expect. And so that's really wide open, whether that's Ricky Seals-Jones, Darrell Daniels, Max Williams. I think if we had to pick over Caleb Wilson, as of right now, I'd say 3 tight ends, and it's going to be Clay, Ricky Seals-Jones, and Max Williams because on special teams, you need kind of tight end type players. And I think Max Williams is the best fit for that. But moving on, coming next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, we're to talk about the bubble players. So there are several players, kind of familiar players to Cardinals fans who find themselves firmly on the roster bubble right now. Who are those guys? That's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. And it's time to talk about bubble players. Who are the guys that perhaps, obviously there are a lot of actual bubble players, but who are the ones worth noting? Who are the guys that, maybe a year ago were on the team or had some sort of impact or should have had some impact, yet now are definitely uncertain? I just published one that mentioned 6, but I'd like to know what you have in mind. Who are kind of your top 2 or 3 guys on the bubble?
Obviously the Williams boys are the first 2 that come to mind, Brandon and Chad. It's a new, I know Steve Keim's still here, so that is kind of their lifeline. But at the same time, you've got, new coaches, new coordinators, all of that. So it's hard to imagine that if they continue to not play well, that they'll still make this roster. So those are, I think, the easiest 2 to name right off the bat.
Right. And the sheer number of guys that they brought in at their positions. At receiver. Well, and they sort of, at least Chad Williams almost is the personification of the stink at that position from last year. Just the lack of, he's got talent, but he just never seemed to get separation. He'd make a nice catch or two and just be completely he can block nice, but is he really a tight end? You don't need just receivers that can block. You need him who can actually catch a football. And they flooded the position at receiver. So they signed 2 in Kevin White and Damiere Byrd, and they drafted 3. And then they brought in another drafted free agent. And at cornerback, they did the same thing. They signed 2 and drafted another one. And so Brandon Williams as of right now. So if we're looking at the basic depth chart, you expect, so you got Patrick Peterson, Robert Alford, then you've got Byron Murphy and Tremaine Bach. So that's 4 guys off the bat that you're like, yeah, they're going to be on this team. After that, now you have a bunch of guys, young, so kind of the same. Now, Brandon Williams is exceedingly gifted athletically, but he's not the only one. Dietrich Nichols, Chris Jones, and Nate Brooks, who's a really intriguing undrafted rookie out of North Texas, all are going to be battling for what's probably one other spot, which makes Williams' spot on the roster real tenuous unless he can split. It seems like the best case scenario, he makes the team because Patrick Peterson gets suspended, so he's off the roster. Another guy for me is also in the secondary, and this is thanks to the supplemental pick of Jalen Thompson. Rudy Ford finds himself firmly on the roster bubble, a guy who was a key contributor to their number 5 special teams unit in the league. He was injured his rookie year, but last year he didn't show. Actually, when he had the chance to play safety, it wasn't pretty, but his special teams play is very solid. But now he's buried. You've got the 2 starters, DJ Swearinger, Budda Baker. You've got Deontay Thompson and Jalen Thompson. And then you've got the veteran Josh Shaw. You're going to have to think that Rudy right now is definitely on the bubble because he's going to have to beat out at least one or two of these 3 guys between the 2 draft picks and Shaw, who is a Vance Joseph guy, which means she's probably going to be on the roster.
Yeah, and when you look at kind of the makeup of the roster, bubble guys this year are, again, it's kind of like position battles, right? They're harder to find because you know, when you talk about Vance Joseph, when you talk about Cliff Kingsbury, we don't necessarily have a great grip on what they're looking for at this point. I mean, Joseph obviously has a little bit of a history that we can kind of draw from, but I mean, one season in Miami and 2 in Denver, and both those seasons in Denver were, you know, really tumultuous. So what is he looking for? I mean, when you look at the overall makeup of the roster, it just doesn't lend itself to a ton of guys on the bubble. Would you say that this roster in general, more than in other years, because of the unknown, just makes it hard to kind of pinpoint which guys are truly bubble guys?
I think actually it's true because you can't pinpoint as many. What you have is like a lot of bubble guys, but
Right,
a lot of them you really don't really know about, and so we're kind of picking out the ones that we know. The Chad
that makes sense. Yeah. What about? I mean, let's look at this. What about the running backs? I mean, outside of Edmonds and obviously David Johnson, like, is DJ Foster are DJ Foster and TJ Logan bubble guys?
Kind of, but it's wide open. That's the thing, because they only have two other that they've got. Dante Strickland and Wes Hills, undrafted guys, and so they're kind of on the bubble, but they have more of a shot to make the roster simply because of numbers. Another guy, so there's 2 other receivers that I put on the bubble, and they're notable mention. One is Trent Sherfield, and the other's Pharaoh Cooper. Pharaoh Cooper is an interesting guy because of the return game. He was picked off of waivers. He was a Pro Bowl all-pro guy in 2017, got hurt in 2018, and then JoJo Natson stole his job away on the Rams, and so they cut ties with him. And the Cardinals brought him in, but now we don't know what's going to happen at returner, and it's not like he's much of a receiver. So I put him on the bubble because I don't know what's happening in the terms of the specialist, because I think that's the only way he makes the roster.
Yeah, and that's what is so interesting and quick about the NFL, you know, and the cliche not for long. I mean, Pharaoh Cooper was an all-pro return guy, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
And now, I mean, hopefully they're not the worst team in the NFL, but I mean, just for the time being, he's a bubble guy on the worst team in the NFL. Like, man, it comes at you so quick. You know, and then you look at the draft picks. I mean, Rudy Ford, Deontay Thompson, Jalen Thompson, like all these guys that they, you know, obviously we talked about Brandon Williams, but all these guys that they've drafted in the last couple of years that are all safeties. Like, they can't keep all of them, can they?
No, they can't. Which is why you have to think that a guy like Deontay's going to have an edge, and that they used a supplemental pick, so they used the next year draft pick to take Jalen Thompson. So you think that they have an idea that he's going to be on the roster, because otherwise, why in the world would they have used a pick on him? Just
right.
You know,
I mean, unless there's something crazy that happens. So
right.
So it seems like it's Rudy Ford that's really on the bubble out of that group, and he's been one of the more solid contributors along special teams. I mean, that's been where he's made his MO, or, you know, so yeah, I mean, it's just it's crazy to look at this roster, because you're like, oh, this isn't a great roster. But then in the same time, you look at it and you go, I don't know where bubble guys come from, because the bubble guys are, like you said, they're going to be guys we don't really know. I mean, we're going to be, you know, is Wes Hills, is he really a bubble guy? Probably, but I mean, how many fans even know he's on the roster? Like, how many questions are you going to get during training camp where they're like, hey, Jess, who's number, and whatever number he's wearing.
The name of it, where we went to college isn't a real place. What is it? Slippery Rock?
Yeah, exactly. So
it's not as cool.
So, I mean, when you look at it from that perspective, like that's what makes this so. This is like we said, the intrigue in this training camp is so different than any camp I can remember.
Coming next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, we're going to talk about who are the specific players you're watching. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast. We've talked about a number of different players, but you specifically, who do you have your eyes on? I think let's take Kyler Murray off the board because we all know we're going to be watching Kyler Murray. The whole world, the NFL, Kyler Murray is one of the most exciting players in the league by far. So let's exclude Kyler Murray. Who are you specifically watching in particular in camp?
I think the first guy that jumps out has got to be David Johnson. You look at it, and DJ has a chance to really kind of reestablish himself as one of the clear superstars in this game. And I think the offense that he'll be in and the opportunities that he will get are going to be something that's worth watching, because how are they using him consistently? Where is he lining up, and what are going to be expected? What is going to be expected of him this year?
I want to watch on the pair. This is not so much in camp. So I'll move a different direction then. I'm going to have my eyes firmly on Robert Alford. He, as a number 2, you were pretty confident about. But he's going to be number 1 for almost half the season. So he's going to have to look really good in camp, and he's going to have to look good in the preseason. And if he doesn't, that's going to... Knowing what we know about Vance Joseph, it's predicated on natural pressure and natural coverability. And if you don't have that, it changes what he likes to do defensively, and it limits what he wants to do. So Alford is a guy we need to see some good things out of.
Yeah, and Alford, begets the whole question mark of the secondary, because if you solidify Alford, and like you said, you felt really okay with him as your 2, like finally coming into an offseason, you're like, oh, all right, corner 2 is not an issue, and then Peterson gets suspended for 6 games, and now you're like, oh, so not only now is corner 1 an issue, but now corner 2 is an issue too. So, on the flip side, is it Brock? Is it Murphy? Like, I know it's a battle that we talked about, but at the same time, where is Byron Murphy? Because we know what Tremaine Brock is. And I'm not trying to be rude, but he's kind of a low-end starter. So where is Byron Murphy in his development, in his growth as a player, and what does he kind of look like in camp, and does he look like a guy that can hold up?
Also, Hassan Reddick. All eyes on Hassan Reddick, because it's time to look like a linebacker, and it's time to make plays, especially when you've got Jordan Hicks next to him. He's playing a position he's a little more familiar with. He's got some experience. He doesn't have to worry about gap integrity or whatever, or whatever. But Hassan Reddick has got to look good this year.
Yeah, and Hassan is a big one. But I think you look at the trio in front of him, and I think that's just as important. I think when you look at, Corey Peters, Darius Fallon, and Rodney Gunter, are they guys that can free up Hicks and Reddick to use their athleticism and really run and play? And those 3 guys, I'm going to be watching a lot of that, because we know who Corey Peters is. If he's healthy and he's only asked to play 50 to 60% of snaps, he's going to be, a very, very, very good defensive lineman in the NFL. So, you watch health for him, but then Fallon and Gunter, were they flash in the pans? Is Fallon, now that he got paid, is he a little, different? Is Gunter continuing to be motivated since he didn't get his long-term deal? How does that all work out?
And then the one other player that I have my eyes on is DJ Humphries. One, be healthy, and two, be good. Your left tackle. He's happy-go-lucky. He's super talented, but maybe he lacks the. I mean, it looks like he lacks the intensity sometimes, and he's gotta put that, especially contract year. This is a critical year for him in his career, because if he doesn't stay healthy, then at 5 years in the league, he's never going to be more than a journeyman. This is the year for him to prove that he is a true starting left tackle in this league.
Well, and if he doesn't, the Cardinals are in a bad situation. The other guy on the offensive line is going to be Justin Pugh. We know Marcus Gilbert's super talented and injury prone. The question becomes with Pugh, did he already, is the fall already too great? And if that is the truth, if his game isn't there anymore, then they're in a bit of trouble, because they invested heavily in him, and they can get out of it next year. But now all of a sudden you've created another hole on the offensive line, when you're just hoping that there's less after this year than there has been in years past.
And coming up next on the Rise Up Sierra podcast, the last section that we're going to do, who are some players that could surprise in camp this year? Who are your surprise picks that stand out? That's coming up next on the final segment of Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, and we're going to wrap up the show talking about who are guys that could surprise. I have three players in particular that four, in fact, who I'm not predicting they will, but based on what happened in the offseason, might get more attention or might do more than fans might expect. Number one, and this would be Reese Odiombo on the offensive line. He is, outside of Max Garcia, the only veteran among the reserves. And so he's a guy that's gotten really almost no talk in the offseason, but keep an eye on him. And if he can be solid, capable, because his experience could find him a place on the roster. What about you?
Surprises, I think the first one that is going to surprise a lot of people is going to be Kevin White. I think he's going to play really well. You kind of talked about it with Hedebo there. When you see a guy that is a veteran that's been in camps, that's, there's usually a difference of those guys. I'm not saying he's going to go put up 1,000 yards, but I am saying that he is a guy that can make the roster and be a guy that is maybe the number 4 wide receiver on a team that's going to use 4 wide receivers quite a bit.
And White, for me, is one of there's basic for me at the wide receiver positions. I see 4 kind of wild cards because they kind of change that room. If Kevin White's good, because he's got the whole thing, if he can be healthy and do what he can do, because there's no one more talented in that room than he is. He has size, he has elite speed, he has athleticism and playmaking ability. He could do that. Then you've got Pharaoh Cooper, you've got Trent Sherfield, and then you've got Demir Bird as a guy to watch. He's a guy, he's small and he's super fast, and he got more looks than I expected him to in the offseason. And so he's a guy who could flash. Cardinals fans are very familiar with the training camp / preseason receiver stars. Bird might be that guy. Even though he's not an undrafted rookie, he could be that guy to really flash in camp in the preseason.
Yeah, he could be. And like you said, we're not necessarily familiar with him, but he's a guy that has, some talent. The other surprise, I think, for training camp, and this isn't a player or anything, but I think we're going to be surprised how little we see out of Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray. I don't think that they're going to really reveal anything. I think they're going to be super conservative and kind of you may even be like, okay, what's going on? Why is Kyler struggling? And so I think that it's going to be surprising just how little they're really putting into the early parts of camp and things of that nature.
One other player, and this I'm going to look at the undrafted. So of all the undrafted rookies on the team, I think the one that you might find the most intriguing because of his background would be the cornerback out of North Texas, Nate Brooks. He was a big playmaker. I think he's a little undersized, but at a position where the very, very back end is uncertain at best. I think cornerback and running back are the positions where the undrafted guys could flash, and I think Nate Brooks could be that guy. And at running back, it might be Wes Hills, the kid out of a rock school called Slippery Rock. But he's lanky, he's long, and he thinks he's the steal of the draft, even though he wasn't drafted.
And that's the thing is, with these kind of under the radar guys, and you talked about the kid that was the quarterback from, was it Maine?
Yeah.
That now is the tight end. Like, he's got a good athletic profile and size profile, and you're just like, I don't know what to expect because, one, it's Maine, but two, like, the tight end position's kind of just such an unknown of itself, so we don't know what to expect. So, I think the biggest surprise this whole thing's going to be just how poised and dynamic Kyler is when it actually starts.
And with that, let's wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. We will probably. We'll see what happens, whether we do a show this next week, because we want to actually get a full look at players. We might not have a show next week. It might be the week after as we get ready for the first preseason game and really have some impressions from a full week of camp. But until then, this has been the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. That's Seth Cox from Revenge of the Birds. I'm Jess Root from CardsWire.com. Thank you for listening. Make sure to sign up and subscribe and rate all the get. But we'll be back again in the next week or two for the next best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.